Morning, friends. All right, Genesis chapter 1 is where we are today, and that we're going to be on page 1 in the Blue Bibles, and we're going to stay there for a minute. Genesis chapter 1 is where we are. We are setting off on a study of the book of Genesis that's going to take us quite some time, and I don't want to tell you how long because I don't want to scare you away, but we're going to be in Genesis for a while, and probably take a break at Christmas. But as we're studying it, we want to specifically, and I think we set off on this last week, spend time in the book of Genesis looking for Jesus. We preached Luke 24. We talked about how you can see, Christ said the whole Old Testament is about him. We believe the whole Old Testament is about him, and that's one of the things we want to very specifically do. So one of the things I want to encourage you to do is as you're reading, and I hope you're reading ahead, your bulletin every week, we have the list of the scriptures that are coming. I hope that you're reading ahead to prepare for each week as you're hearing the sermons, because one of the things I want you to do is do your own investigative work and see, where do I see Jesus in this? Because you don't need me to always interpret it for you. One of the things I want to do is help give tools for you so that you learn to read the Bible the way that Jesus read the Bible. And so that's one of the things we're hoping to accomplish in this series. So many of you, or most of you, are aware what happened to us, to my family, as we were on the way to Charlotte this week. We were taking my son to hockey camp, and we were behind an 18-wheeler, and the next thing we know, there's a giant piece of rubber because someone had blown a tire. A couple of cars in front of us. It comes up. It was pretty amazing. It just hit the asphalt and stuck there. It's not supposed to do that, but that was, I believe, the hand of the Lord. But we ran over it because there was no way around it, and when we hit it, it messed up the undercarriage of our car. But it did something very different than that, because we limped along for a little while. I pulled off on the side of the road. I took care of as much as I could with a roll of electrical tape. But you know what happened? I got back in the car, and I have this thing where I don't stress in the moment, but then once the moment's over, like I'm totally stressed out. And so I'm sitting here, we're riding, and I'm just not even talking. Like Gabriel's in the back talking to me, and Ruth Ann's talking to me, and we're all just, everybody around me is talking, and I'm not talking at all, because I'm totally stressed out. And I had to come to bear with my own soul. Why am I so stressed out? And one of the reasons is, one of the things that accidents or incidents do for us is it gives us, for just a brief moment, the keen awareness that we are not in control of anything. I'm steering that vehicle. Actually, I wasn't. We were steering that vehicle. We were driving, and as we're driving, you live, the only way you can function driving 70 miles an hour is to somehow have in your mind this illusion of control, that as long as I'm driving and as long as I'm steering, I'm fast enough and capable enough to get out of the way of things, and everything's going to be fine. And we have to live that way. We have to function that way in order really to live. But sometimes it's healthy for us to run into reminders in our day-to-day life of just how much we are not in control over, so that we might learn what it means to really trust God. Well, the Israelites, remember we talked about the fact that the book of Genesis is written to the Israelites as they're getting ready to go into the promised land. We talked about some of the stories as you read the first 5 books of the Bible about faithless Israel, and how over and over again they could have trusted God, but instead they grumbled and they murmured and they complained and they refused to go where God told them to go. And over again, they had this illusion that God was somehow not big enough or capable enough or powerful enough to be able to do what God has said he's going to do for these people. And the reality is we could totally relate to Israel like that, because there are a number of places in our lives where we will say things like, I just don't understand why this is happening, which is a good thing to say, but then we take it too far and say, and therefore, I have to take control of these circumstances, or therefore, I have to do it this way, because clearly God's not going to take care of me. And so what we see as we're reading the book of Genesis, as we're reading this creation story, is this reminder of exactly who God is. Because over and over with Israel, you would see, as you read the rest of the Old Testament, they couldn't manipulate the weather, and so they started worshiping a God, lowercase g, that promised that if you would just make enough sacrifices, he would bring rain, because they wanted to manipulate the weather. They couldn't see how they could overpower their enemies, who were so much greater in number than they were, and so they started adopting the gods around them to worship those gods, so that they might have some feeling, some idea of maybe having control over the other nations, so they might have military victory Over and over again, Israel finds themselves unsatisfied with submission to the one true God. They were unsatisfied with waiting on God to accomplish his purposes. And so they fashioned their own gods. And the reality of it is, so do we. And that's the great value of Genesis 1. You know, Genesis 1 is likely the most talked about and controversial chapter in the whole Bible. And I can tell you, I bet, in your minds now, there are a million questions about what I'm going to talk about. Let me settle your minds. Here's what I'm going to talk about today. God. Now, I'm going to go into more detail than that, obviously, but we're going to focus on what I believe the focal point of the chapter is. I believe that the focal point of this chapter is that God exercises total control over everything that he has created, and he has created everything. I believe that when it was written to the Israelites, that was the most important message that they could have. Now, here's the other thing. I think that there are a lot of other things in Genesis chapter 1 that are totally worth discussing. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to preach the main point of this text because I believe that I have a God-given responsibility to preach the main point of the text. I'm going to do that. And then, after the service is over this morning, I'm going to pull out the whiteboard. I'm going to hang out over here. We can nerd out on Genesis 1 all you want because I've got tons of stuff that I'd love to talk about, but that's not the main point of the text. So we're going to spend some time today just discussing the main point of Genesis 1 in the sermon. I'm going to hang around here for as long as anyone wants to hang around and talk about Genesis 1 afterwards. I'll tell you everything that I know, and then I'll tell you lots of things that I don't even understand. And I'll be glad to do that. But I want us to really look for God and what this chapter is teaching us about God. Because the whole Bible is about him. And then we can talk about the other stuff as well. So that's the plan for today. Now, if you can't stay after the service, then I hopefully am not a difficult person to catch. You send me an email, phone call, text message, smoke signal, carrier pigeon. There are multiple ways that you can get in touch with me to ask any question that you want. Like every pastor who goes into ministry really thinking somehow that all ministry is getting to answer people's Bible questions. Like, I love doing that. It's one of my favorite things to do. So if you have questions, either stay and ask them, or if you can't stay, ask me. I will tell you. If I don't know, I will tell you I don't know. But I love talking about it. So that's the plan for today. So let's do this. Let's read. We're going to start in verse 3. We're going to get all the way to verse 23 today, Lord willing. Here we go. Genesis chapter 1. Reading together, verse 3. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good. And God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God made the expanse and separated the waters that were under the expanse from the waters that were above the expanse, and it was so. And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and the waters that were gathered together he called seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants, yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And it was so. The earth brought forth vegetation, plants yielding seed according to their own kinds, and trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. There was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the heavens, to separate the day from the night, and let them be for signs and for seasons, for days and for years. And let them be lights in the expanse of the heavens to give light upon the earth." And it was so. And God made the two great lights, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night, and the stars. And God set them in the expanse of the heavens to give light on the earth, to rule over the day and over the night, and to separate the night from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth, across the expanse of the heavens. So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the waters and the seas, and let birds multiply on the earth. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. Let's pray together. Father, would we listen to your words today? Would your Holy Spirit open our eyes and ears to see you more clearly and to worship you more because of the great work of Jesus Christ, in whose name we pray. Amen. So today I want us to see God exercising total control of everything he has created. And we're going to do that through three aspects of his character. We're going to see three things about the character of God in Genesis 1 that I believe are exactly the things that Moses would want us to see, that we need to see in order to understand how to apply a chapter like this to our life. We're going to see the perfection of God, we're going to see the power of God, and we're going to see the purpose of God. So first, let's look at the perfection of God. One of the ways that we see God's utter perfection in Genesis chapter 1 is not just in his creation, but in the actual way that this chapter is written. I don't think we often recognize what a perfect piece of literature we are dealing with when we look at Genesis chapter 1. And part of that is because we're reading it in the English language. It was originally written in the Hebrew language. And there are certain things that don't often translate as well, like there are plays on words and numbers of words that are used that make sense. But listen to this. Listen to how this works, okay? So number one, we understand that 7, or if you don't, 7 in the Bible is a number of perfection. Like anytime you see 7, that's the numbers of days it took for God to create the world. Over and over again in the book of Revelation, you see lots of 7s and numbers that are divisible by 7. 7 indicates perfection for us. Just listen to this. The name for God in the creation account occurs 35 times. That is 7 times 5. Heavens and the earth, the words, occur 21 times. That is 3 times 7. Light and day are found 7 times in the first paragraph. Water on the second and third days is mentioned 7 times. In days 5 and 6, which we haven't gotten to 6 yet, but in days 5 and 6, the word living occurs 7 times. It was good. The phrase "it was good" occurs 7 times, and on the 7th time it was very good. The second verse of this passage contains 14 Hebrew words, which is 7 times 2. In the 7th paragraph, which deals with the 7th day, there are 3 consecutive sentences consisting of exactly 7 words. The actual paragraph here has 35 words, 35 times 7. Now, friends, this is considered, most of the people that I read this week, one of them calls it probably the most perfect piece of literature ever written. And there are a lot of people that think this is just some myth, that there's just some legendary nature to it. Friends, I believe, and I hope you do too, these are the very words of God. And they were written in a very precise way to give us some very precise truth. You know, if you came today doubting whether you can have confidence in God or whether you can have confidence in God's word, I want to tell you, we believe that his word is perfect and it was written to display his perfection. One of the reasons that we believe that you must believe that the Bible is inerrant is because it reveals to us the nature and character of God. And if you cannot trust his word, how would you know if you could trust his character? We believe that we can trust his word because the nature of the word of God shows that it is perfect. It reveals to us who he is, and it shows us a perfect God who will execute perfect power over a perfect creation. One of the things you can't escape in Genesis 1 is how perfectly everything follows and works. There's a perfect pattern that God follows to create. We're going to see in just a minute. But here's the thing, is when Moses is speaking about this perfection, he's speaking to a group of people like us who would have seen that there is brokenness in the world. There are a lot of things in the world that don't make sense. Moses wants us to have a picture in Genesis chapter 1 of what the world looked like before the fall. And that does a couple of things for us. We believe the gospel is not just the good news of Jesus Christ coming and bleeding and dying. That is certainly part of the gospel. But you know, the great promise of hope is not just that we're going to go to heaven when we die. It's that all of this is going to be recreated and made new. That's the end hope of the gospel. We hope for more than heaven. We hope for restoration, where everything is, all the wrongs are undone, and God has executed perfect judgment on his enemies, and he's recreated the earth to look like it did here in Genesis chapter 1, in Genesis chapter 2. And so they're speaking. We see the flawless universe here on display. And through that, we can see that brokenness in the world was not a result of the flaw in the design. In other words, the designer didn't mess things up. That's one of the things that Moses wants them to see. This is not, brokenness didn't come in because God created a flaw in his design. God's design was perfect. And so we're supposed to see this. So the chapter as a whole will show us the perfection of God, the perfection of God's world, and of the perfection in the world and the universe before the fall happens. We don't just see the perfection of God, we see the power of God. And we talked a lot last week just about the sheer power that this chapter shows us. But each section, each part of it, all the way through, shows us this power of this creative God. I think each generation that comes into the faith, each generation of people that believe the gospel of Jesus Christ tends to hyper-focus on one aspect of the character of God at the expense of the others. That's why we need the Word, and we need to be corrected and taught by the Word. So some generations have accentuated the judgment of God so that others would hear and think that he's not loving. Other generations have accentuated the love of God, and so we don't see him as just. But this is a corrective for us, because one of the things that we cannot overstate in the Christian faith is the power, holiness, and sovereignty of God. This chapter is intended to serve for us as a course correction. He is utterly powerful. He is utterly sovereign. He is utterly holy. These things are total and complete, and because they are so, they invade our perceptions of freedom in ways that we don't like. But this chapter is written to a people that had a history already of failing to rest in the power of God. And they needed to be reminded. A people who would attempt to manipulate outcomes in their own lives by attempting to manipulate God or creating a God that was suitable to them. This chapter is a corrective in that. Moses uses heavy action words about God that help us to see the power that we have here, that we see that God has here. First, he has the power to create. Just a glimpse of how much power we have in God by seeing his power to create the universe. He speaks. Every time, over and over again, the refrain here is God speaks, saying, "Let there be light," or "Let there be an expanse." Every other creation story in the time that Israel existed revolved around a God who had to use something or do something from something else in order to create. That's what makes the Bible so unique, is that God spoke the universe into creation. He spoke, and it happened. This is such a contrast. He separates. He brings order. God brought order to the universe. Everything that's happening in the world happens because of the order that God has given to it. Sorry, guys, I'm having trouble up here. He called. He names everything all the way up to the fourth day. He names the day and the light. He separates. He names the earth and the sea. All not just created by God, but named by him. Now, the reason that matters is because we're going to see over and over again, everything in the universe is subject to God's rule. He controls the earth. The plants on the earth grow because God makes them grow. He's the one who says, "Be fruitful and multiply," and he's the one who lays claim to actually rule those things. And we see a God that sees. God saw. Now, what makes this interesting is that God reflects on what he has made. He sees everything that he's made, and he knows it. all at once. He flings the stars across the sky and he sees each of them perfectly clearly. Think about the utter expanse of God's creation, friends. Just the distance from here to the sun is 93 million miles. Now, the earth is roughly 25,000 miles around. Here's what that means. If you could unroll the earth and make it flat, it would take 3,800 earths to reach the sun. The next closest star is 4 light years away. That's a whole bunch of zeros. I was going to do that, but it's more math than I understand. That sounds like a lot. It's a lot. All right? The thing that we need to be reminded of in a chapter like this, in a passage like this, is that the one true God of heaven and earth is perfectly present in all of those places at one time, along with every other star, planet, and comet and meteor in the entire universe. He is all of those places. Our problem is very often not that we think of God as too big. It's that we think of him as too small. He sees it all, and he sees it all perfectly, in totality, far better than we would ever see it. And he blesses. He has the power to bless his creation. So he creates the swarming things and the birds, and he says, be fruitful and multiply. God's blessing is built in to the fact that his creatures can continue to make more creatures, and that is his blessing. But it's not just this power to create, it's also a power to evaluate. Over and over again, God evaluates his own creation and says what? It is good. We don't often think about the fact that even in Genesis 1, we see the judgment of God. He is judging his own creation and saying it is good. Now, what good means here is that it functions perfectly. It does exactly what God has intended it to do. So the first time we see the word good occur in the whole Bible, the way it is used and the meaning that it has is that it is functioning exactly as intended. Friends, I would contend that the understanding of good hasn't changed. Functioning exactly as intended. So even now, the good things that we do are the things that we were supposed to do in the first place. That's the way we were created to be. So that when bad comes into the picture, or when evil comes into the picture, we understand those things to be functioning out of bounds in a way that God has not intended or in a way that's not yet complete. And so we see this picture of good. Calling something good is a judgment. God has set the standard. We don't just see the power of God, we also see the purpose of God. Now, this is a good question that if you haven't asked, one of these days you might, you may not. I'm going to ask it for you. And this is the question. Why is there something and not nothing? Why does anything exist? I say the two great questions that everyone asks at some point or the other, in some language or the other, in some way or the other, is, who am I and what am I here for? Those are the two questions that drive us. They set so much of our identity. Just the way you answer those two questions. Who am I and what am I here for? Well, we can ask that question of Genesis 1, right? Okay, we can start to see when we get next week, we'll see who we are, but why? Why did God create anything? I think that's a helpful question that we can start out with understanding. Number one, why God didn't create. Why didn't God create the universe? There's some reasons that we know that it couldn't be. Number one, we know that he didn't create because he was lonely. God did not get lonely one day and say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a bunch of rebellious creatures. That'll keep me busy. That's not why God created it all. God's never lonely. He exists as a perfect Trinity in perfect communion and community with himself from the foundations of the earth and before. From eternity, God has existed in community. He didn't need somebody to love. That's not why he created. He didn't create because he had some limitation of himself and then needed to create physical stuff. God's not lacking in anything. We know that's true, right? He did not create because he looked into time and foresaw a thing that he wanted to take advantage of. I like how Stephen Lawson puts this. Here's what he says. He says, God did not look down the tunnel of time and see the universe evolve out of nothing. He did not foresee a big bang and then adopt the chaotic results to his eternal plan. To the contrary, God intentionally spoke into being everything out of nothing. He was under no coercion to create. So why? Why did he create the universe? I think the Bible tells us an answer that has two parts. First, he created the universe to display his glory. You remember Isaiah 6? We started the God Is series with the passage out of Isaiah 6. Do you remember the song of the angels, right? Holy, holy, holy is the Lord God Almighty. The whole earth is full of His glory. He's created this world to glorify Himself. Isaiah 43, 6-7 teaches that everyone who is created and everything that is created for God's glory. Psalm 19:1 teaches that the heavens declare the glory of God. Everything is created for His glory. But then we also have the New Testament, which teaches us even more clearly that the purpose of creation is to display the glory of God through the person and work of Jesus Christ. And so we see the work of Christ, and we recognize the world was created that God will be glorified through the person and work of Jesus Christ. It's His earth. Remember, we talked about this last week. It's His. He has made it all, and it all exists for His glory. So why does all of this matter? Why does Genesis 1 make a difference at all in the way we live our Christian lives? Just a couple of things that I think is helpful for us. And I want to do it this way. I want to talk first about why this would have mattered to Israel. Okay? Remember, it's written to Israel, written for their instruction. And then why, based on that, it matters to us. First, I think Moses is teaching us here that God made all the things that the other nations worshiped. God made all the things that the other nations worshiped. You remember last week when we talked about the reasons that Moses wrote the book of Genesis. One was so that the people would understand that they alone were worshiping the one true God. You know, the pagan nations, the nations around them, were ultimately worshiping created things instead of the Creator. You know, each day of creation somehow is like God's war against the false gods that the people would be tempted to worship. He creates and separates the waters that the other myths thought existed before God. He creates the great sea creatures. It doesn't seem like a big deal for us when we read about God creating all these sea creatures. But you know, there's tons of fables that existed when the Old Testament people were alive about the gods who had to go to war against the sea creatures in order to defeat them and create the universe. Moses is like, nope, God made all that. He didn't have to go to war against anybody. He made it. You know, even to the way that he talks about the stars and the sun and the moon. You ever notice that when he creates the sun and the moon, he doesn't call it the sun and the moon. He calls it the greater light and the lesser light. And you're like, why? Moses totally knew the words for sun and moon. Like, there were words for sun and moon, but those words were very closely connected to words that were used in other languages to talk about gods. And they were coming out of Egypt. You know what the primary god of Egypt was? The sun god. And so instead of giving them names, he says he created this big light and this little light. He made those things. Oh, he made the stars also. You know, astrology, the belief that stars can somehow control your destiny, that's not a new belief at all. That's a very old sin. I don't know how else to put it. But it's the belief that somehow those things can control destiny. And you know what God does? He goes, I love it because he says he made the greater light to rule the day, the lesser light to rule the night. And it's almost like a passing. You get to the end of it, it's like, oh, and he made the stars also. Because he's intended to show those things that you're tempted to worship, those things that you're tempted to hope in as controlling your destiny, God made those things. He owns them. He's created them. They're all made by His seas, the borders of the seas. You know, some of the great speeches of God in the book of Job show us the God that measures out the seas by the strength of His power. You know, the sea has always been considered powerful. You ever think about the fact that when you see some sort of new end-of-the-world catastrophic movie, you know, these movies that say that we're going to eventually destroy the universe, we're going to destroy the earth by being so bad to it, and one of these days it's going to come back and rebel and kill us all. We're fascinated by this idea. You know, every one of those movies at some point or the other has what? Like the ocean coming up and swallowing this whole city because we still somehow inherently can feel the power of the sea. And yet Moses is aware of this, and he writes and says, that sea that seems so powerful, God spoke it into existence in a day, and He controls it all. He's intending to show these people that the thing that they are so tempted to worship, God made. Friends, sometimes we need to be reminded that the things that we are prone to worship, God made. The desires that we think will somehow satisfy us were made by a God who owns it all. The things that we think will bring us sense of purpose, the things that we think will bring us hope, were created by the giver of hope. And only resting in Him, not just in His gifts, but in the giver Himself. Only in those things will you find the hope that you're looking for in the first place. But we find our security and our hope and our joy in things that will never hold up to the weight of our own expectations. We seek satisfaction in false gods that will never deliver. This passage is intended to show us the great power of God. And in seeing that, we're to see that all the things that we give power to in our lives pale in comparison to the God of the Bible. God is worthy of worship, and nothing else is. That's not all it shows us. It also shows us that God's kingdom was made according to design. So Israel was plagued with doubt and fear. We have story after story of Israel in the wilderness, and grumbling and doubting and failing, and there's so many underlying questions in their wondering that are either directly asked or indirectly applied. And they're asking, how is God's chosen people? How do we end up as slaves in Egypt? They're asking, how do we end up nomads, now wandering around in the wilderness with nowhere to call our home, and now we have to fight to get in the land that God has promised? God shows them the problem's not with His design. It's designed perfectly. We're going to see in just a couple of chapters, when we get to chapter 3, the problem lies in the heart of men who desire to be God. You know, this rings true for me today. I hope it does with you too. You know, so much of my response to difficulty and suffering is thinking something like, I really wish I just understood why this is happening to me. I really just wish I understood why this bad thing came into my life. You know, the reality is what we're not seeking there. We're not really seeking an explanation, because let me tell you what I already know, at least about myself, is even if I have an explanation, I'm often not satisfied with the explanation. If you're not satisfied in the explainer, you'll never be satisfied with the explanation. But what we do know is that God is good and perfect, and that His creation was good and perfect. And there's a plan for recreation and restoration that comes through the hope of the gospel. The third thing we see here is that God's blessing was on His people. Even in the midst of their rebellion, even in the midst of their violation of the law of God, even in the midst of them constantly doubting the goodness of God, God has put His blessing on His people. He gave life and meaning and purpose to everything in the universe. He created life, and then He gave the ability to make more life. Friends, we have been blessed by God, not just by any of those things, but by the very presence of eternal life that comes through the hope of the gospel. We have connected God's blessing to earthly prosperity in some extremely unhelpful and unhealthy ways. Stories like this remind us that God's greatest blessing is being able to rest in His power. This chapter shows us His greatness and His goodness. And it shows us that through the person and work of Jesus Christ. So that leads us to a question that we started the sermon with, and it's this: how does this passage teach us about Jesus? Well, there's a story in the Gospels that you may be familiar with. They're getting ready, the disciples are getting ready to cross the sea to go to the Gadarenes. They get on the boat, and suddenly a great storm comes up. You guys remember what Jesus is doing? He is asleep in the boat. And the disciples are panicking because they're in the boat and it's a storm and Jesus is asleep. And so they come up and they ask just a really, really fantastic question, which is what? Lord, do you not care that we are perishing? What kind of a question is that? It's one that we ask, right? Lord, don't you care that I'm suffering? And so Jesus gets up, and what does He do? He looks at His disciples. He speaks to two groups here. First, He looks at His disciples and He says, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" Then He looks at the sea, and in a tone of voice reminiscent of a parent speaking to a disobedient child, He says what? Peace, be still. He shushed the sea. That's what He does. And then Matthew says that there was a great calm. Now, I tend to think the sea was calm because God spoke it that way. And the disciples were calm because they were looking at the sea and looking at Jesus with their mouths open like this. Right? And we know this because the question they ask, they say, what sort of man is this that even the winds and sea obey him? But we know, right? He wasn't just a man. Who was he? He was the agent of creation. He spoke the sea into existence. Of course he could command the sea because it was his. He owned it. I love how Sally Lloyd Jones in the Jesus Storybook Bible describes this. Friends, if you don't have a copy of the Jesus Storybook Bible for your children, if you're here today as a parent, I want to give you a copy for free. We've got some, please. This is one of the best resources, especially for family devotions, just spending time. But you know what's great about it? Is it's not just good for kids. Like I can remember the first time I read this and went, wow, that's a really great way of putting it. I end up using it a ton in sermons because I think it's extremely helpful. Listen to what she says. She says this, the wind and waves recognized Jesus' voice. They had heard it before, of course. It was the same voice that had made them in the very beginning. They listened to Jesus, and they did what he said. You see, the sea that invoked such terror in the disciples, it belonged to Jesus. The fear, the uncertainty that surrounded the disciples as they felt helpless in the storm, Jesus was perfectly in control. The feeling that they were alone and overwhelmed by trouble, Jesus was perfectly in their midst, protecting them and blessing them. You see, those disciples in the sea acted the same way as the Israelites in the wilderness. And what Jesus spoke at this point in the Gospels is similar to what Moses speaks in Genesis 1. God has made it all. He is perfectly in control. We need to be reminded of this, friends. We take this passage and we look to see the Messiah in it. We will find in Genesis chapter 1 the powerful King Jesus, master of his creation, who took on flesh to save his enemies, and for whom it was no great feat to hush the sea, because he made the sea. Is that the Jesus that you worship today? Do you worship the powerful King, great and mighty to save, and yet merciful and full of grace to his enemies? Friends, he is in total control of his creation, and he calls us to joyfully submit to his rule. Christian, are you resting in the power of God? Do you find joy in his control, even when things don't go the way you want them to? If you're here and you're still rebelling against God, and you've never submitted through repentance and faith, friends, the God that should have utterly destroyed his enemies, who through rebellion have tarnished his whole creation, this same God is not just powerful, but also rich in mercy and has offered pardon to his enemies. And all we must do is repent of our sins and believe in the gospel of Jesus Christ. Friends, would you be free and forgiven today? Christian, would you see the moments of your life in which you are reminded that you're not in control, whether they be car accidents or sickness, the loss of a loved one, the sufferings of life or the loss of a job? Would you look at all those moments as opportunities to rest in the power of the Creator God of heaven and earth, who through his great love for you has adopted you as a son of God forever? Let's pray.